no longer be releasing illegal immigrants with a court date 10 years from now. Asylum officers would have decided and will deport those who fail. Equally important, the legislation would have provided a mandatory trigger for closing the border. If the average weekly of arrests would have exceeded 5,000, the border would have been automatically closed. It does not say we would have been releasing 5,000. Everyone is sent back to Mexico. If any single arrest level exceeded 8,500, the border would have been closed. Everyone is sent back to Mexico. Gone will be the days of the cartels that would have been flooding and overwhelming the system. No bill is perfect. Are there things that I wish would have been included? Of course. Are there things in the package, such as allowing the administration to continue to parole migrants through the ports of entry? I don't like it. Of course I don't like it. However, on this issue, and it's an enormous issue, earlier this week, we arrested over 6,600 illegal immigrants. Over 6,300 of them were released into this country within 48 hours. Tonight, we're going to apprehend a similar amount, and again, they're going to get released. We need Congress to act now and give us the tools to secure our borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Del Cueto, for your testimony. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. John Bolts, the Vice President of the Arizona Farm Bureau. Mr. Bolts, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, Chairman Westerhouse, members of the House of Representatives, and members of this committee. Thank you for coming to Southern Arizona, and good afternoon. I come before you today to thank you for your attention to our man-made crisis at the southern border. Farmers and ranchers in Arizona and neighboring states are in many ways on the front lines of this public policy disaster. And I will mention just a few of those ways in my limited time. Ranchers and their families, employees raising livestock and managing public and private lands in the areas near our border with Mexico face extraordinary challenges with inadequate support from our federal government. The safety of these hardworking people, their families, and property is in danger most days and nights due to a lack of law enforcement by federal agencies responsible for border security in these areas. People seeking to enter our country without passing through a legal port of entry are breaking federal law. The damage these people do to the public and private lands while entering unlawfully is unacceptable, and the refuse they leave behind is remarkable. Is it too much to ask that ranchers of southern Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas be able to raise their livestock and families without being overrun by illegal immigrants and drug runners? Where I live in Yuma County, my neighbors and I grow fresh produce such as lettuce, spinach, melons, broccoli, and cauliflower in season this time of year. And the food that we're growing is mostly eaten raw by people all over the United States and Canada. We have nearly 50,000 people working in agriculture in my small community, of which 8,000 workers are H-2A workers. Over 15,000 are commuter workers who travel into the U.S. daily to work and return to Mexico each night. And the rest of the workforce is comprised of citizens, naturalized citizens, permanent resident card holders. Our workforce in Yuma County is legal, and we have an abundance of legal commerce and activity in my community that is happening daily. That is the backdrop to the mess that we observed since December 2020. It's really been going on for decades, but it's been particularly egregious since around December 2020. We have individuals and families numbering in the thousands entering our country through areas that are not ports of entry on a daily basis. This humanitarian crisis is happening along our county roads and rural areas of my county, just like it is in the rest of the lands across our southern border. We face unique challenges having food crops of the kind that are normally eaten raw growing in open fields. We can't have trespassers entering those fields, passing through these fields, leaving garbage in these fields, or even worse, defecating or urinating in or near these fields. These fresh produce crops are unharvestable if they're exposed to these sort of risks of contamination from human pathogens, and if they're contaminated in any way, it's just simply not usable. Huge waste of natural resources, energy, money. It's been a very commonplace situation the last few years, especially in farmland, about 40,000 acres that's very close to our southern border. And this poses an enormous liability risk and financial hardship to farmers and fresh produce shippers. California, New Mexico, and Texas be able to raise their crops without being overrun by illegal immigrants and drug runners? I don't think it is. Requiring asylum seekers to seek legal status to immigrate at a consulate of the U.S. State Department and to have robust enforcement of our laws at the border would restore safety and an environment only conducive to legal commerce in our border regions. We have been facing an extraordinary level of illegal entries into the United States along our southern border these last few years. 371,036 encounters were dealt with by Customs and Border Protection just in December of 2023. I'll close by calling upon all of you, the members of Congress here and your colleagues back in D.C., and this administration to act and act swiftly to address the crisis we have at the border. It is time to act and put forth meaningful policies that address the problem and give our border communities, law enforcement, and the families that live along this border a reprieve. This is not and should not be a political issue. It is time to put partisan politics aside and solve our border crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolts. I'd like to recognize Mr. James Chilton, the ranch owner from Arivaca, Arizona. Mr. Chilton, good to have you back before the committee. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Jim Chilton. I'm a fifth-generation Arizona rancher from Arivaca, Arizona, a small town of approximately 55 miles southwest of Tucson. The ranch includes private property, state school trust lands, and federal grazing permits in the Coronado National Forest. My ancestors drove cattle from Texas to Arizona Territory in 1885, and our family has been in the ranching business in Arizona for about 139 years. My border concerns are similar to those of most ranchers in the Tucson sector, regardless of whether their ranch is located adjacent to the international border or 100 miles inside the border. The ranch is roughly 50,000 acres, and the image that Chairman Tiffany showed of this camp is adjacent to our ranch. Our ranch has an exposure of about 14 miles to the international boundary, and the wall crept out from the east and was stopped by President Biden on his first day in office. Are we going to show the film? Okay, thank you. For about 10 years, I have collected film from hidden motion-activated cameras of drug packers, previously deported persons, and illegal crossers through our ranch. Of approximately 100 trails traversing our ranch, we have only 5 cameras. So these video images are a small sample of the persons entering through our ranch. Since January 2021, these cameras have recorded 3,050 images of unlawful border crossers. My testimony today hopefully can be given on a thumb drive to each Congress member. For the record, it's hard evidence. These filmed border crossers, as you can see, are wearing camouflage clothes, carpet shoes, and have almost identical backpacks. This is in stark contrast to other border crossers reported in the news along the international boundary in Arizona, California, and Texas, who wear casual street clothes and include women and or children. There are no images on my cameras for the last decade of any women with children. On the south end of the ranch, which is 5.5 miles of the international border, there are now large numbers of people coming across who are women and children, and they walk towards the No More Deaths camp that you showed on your opening statement. Most critically, are any of the 3,050 terrorists, not knowing who is crossing is a national security matter. The video documents a 5-fold increase compared to what we were documenting on average during the Trump and Obama years. Mexican cartel scouts occupying our mountaintops guide these border crossers. During the last 4 months, I have not seen a single Border Patrol agent patrolling these known border entrance trails, since most agents are totally overwhelmed processing undocumented migrants. Please refer to my testimony for my specific recommendations for securing the border at the border. We've got to secure the border at the border. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chilton, thank you for your testimony. And now, members of the dais, we are going to take 5 minutes for each of you for questioning. And I am going to start out, and I'm going to start out with you, Mr. Chilton. So is it accurate? We talked about the environmental degradation, the garbage, the pollution that is out there on lands here, including federal lands in southern Arizona. Is that accurate that this problem has been getting worse?
It's been getting worse. It's an environmental degradation. Witness Del Cueto stated that there have been millions of people apprehended. Bottom line, if you have 3 million people coming across the border at 8.5 pounds of garbage apiece, that's 12,500 tons of trash. I get very tired of riding through my ranch and seeing and observing trash left by these crossers.
So you've seen a massive increase over the last couple of decades, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mayor, I want to turn to you. You mentioned about social media, about how they use that to be able to facilitate these illegal crossings.
Yes, sir.
So we have a federal law that prevents someone from breaking the law. So in other words, let's say you took out an ad in a newspaper and you said, hey, drive your car down to the southern border and you can pick up a bunch of people that are hauling fentanyl. That would be illegal under federal law. Do you think that law should be enforced in regards to the social media companies?
Chairman Tiffany, yes, sir, I definitely do. And the sheriff can talk for days on this one. That is how these low car drivers get their marching orders. They get a text, they get a phone call, meet here, the car station at probably Walmart or Target. Keys are on the tire. Pick up the car, drive south. Pick up the load, drive north.
Yeah. So we had a vice president from Microsoft say that I believe it was one of the social media companies that said that our platform gets used to be able to facilitate these illegal crossings. I think it's about time that the social media companies, who are quick to censor some people, that they do their job to prevent these illegal transactions from going on. Sheriff Daniels, I want to talk about fentanyl for just a second. What's the biggest action, what's the most significant action that happened over the last few years that has led to increased fentanyl coming into the United States of America?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me just say this. The biggest thing is when we deferred our Border Patrol, which is the frontline agents on the line, and put them in processing and other duties assigned. You shut down the checkpoints. You shut down a lot of your aerostats along the border. A
long story, I call it the infrastructure fracture when it comes to CBP. You've opened up the border. And the more agents you take off the border, the more opportunities. The cartels are the true winners in this, and they are exploiting our borders with fentanyl.
So in other words, Sheriff, on January 20th of 2021, when President Biden, in effect, declared open borders, that is largely what precipitated this massive increase of fentanyl coming into our country. Is that right?
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, and I stopped today at a Border Patrol checkpoint. It has not been manned for a long time, and it's not the fault of the Border Patrol. It's because they're being babysitters at this point. It's terribly unfortunate. And by the way, I asked Secretary Mayorkas in a hearing. I sit on the Judiciary Committee. Sheriff Daniels was there in Washington, D.C. He cited the same exact testimony. It has not changed in the 3 times I've asked Sheriff Daniels this question. And I asked, who's not telling the truth? Because Secretary Mayorkas said to us, no, the actions of January 20th of 2021 are not the reason why fentanyl has increased the way it has. I said, who's lying? The sheriff or you? Of course he would not go after Sheriff Daniels because he is above repute amongst not just local citizens here in Arizona, but amongst the people of the United States who have worked with him. Secretary Mayorkas was not telling us the truth. The final thing I'd say in my closing couple seconds is I really appreciate the testimony of Mr. Del Cueto, and I understand why the position that the Border Patrol took in regards to the bill that was released by the Senate. But I just point out a couple things to you in regards to the Senate bill. The President can declare an emergency under that bill at any time and have open borders. Do you think for a second the current President would not declare an emergency and allow open borders to happen? Furthermore, the lead author, one of the lead authors said over the past weekend, under that bill, the border never closes, and went on to say that just today, that our priority, not American citizens, our priority is not American citizens, it is the people who are in here illegally. I now recognize the chairman, Mr. Westerman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, and thank you again to the witnesses for being here. I read all of your testimony, and I appreciate the time and the effort that you put into it and the information that we were able to get from your testimony. Sheriff Daniels, we got a briefing from you this morning, and in your testimony you talked about the $9.4 million. But you had another stat that you didn't say today, but you said this morning that wasn't in your testimony about nationwide. I believe you said $500 million of costs have been incurred by local law enforcement because of the failure to secure the border. Could you elaborate on that?
I can. It's called SCAPS, or SCAPS State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, which is money allocated by the federal government, you all, Congress. That's to help local and state jurisdictions offset costs for those that are incarcerated that are illegally in the country. Since 2009, Arizona, the 15 Arizona sheriffs are owed over $500 million by you all, and we'd like to have our money. But I'm just we get about 5 cents to the dollar on SCAP right now, which has been ineffective to house, especially in a crisis over the last 3 years. Thanks to the state of Arizona and the 2 governors I mentioned, Governor Ducey and Governor Hobbs, and the money we've set aside for our programs, they're helping us offset those costs that otherwise my citizens here in Cochise County would have absorbed.
And Mr. Del Cueto, as I mentioned, been a few years back, I made my first trip to the Arizona border. I saw we did spent a lot of time out on the ground. I saw the piles of trash, the camouflage clothes, the carpet-covered shoes, the backpacks, the water bottles, all the trash that was discarded. And I saw firsthand how the people coming across the border were avoiding Customs and Border Patrol, that they had lookouts out in the mountains radioing down. I've visited many other places along the border. In Texas, it's a whole different story. You see people in plain clothes walking up, and it's almost like they finished the marathon when they see the Border Patrol agent. That's who they're looking for. They want to turn themselves in and claim asylum. So with everything that's happened with the mass numbers in Texas, it appears that's where all the crossings are happening. But on our visit this morning, your colleague told us that in 2020, there were 60,000 apprehensions in the Tucson sector. Today, there's 10 times more than that. I was shocked to learn that, even with more wall being built, more access along the border, And these are people that are trying to avoid getting caught that come across this sector. What do you think's caused the increase here, and why is that not being focused on more than the masses that are crossing in Texas? And it should be, it's a tragedy everywhere it's happening.
So it's the lack of consequences from this administration. They realize that if they cross, they just have to claim asylum and they get released. So what's been happening in Arizona is you're still having the large groups that are coming through here, and they're in more remote areas. So the drive from when agents arrest these individuals to an area of processing is sometimes, well over 1 hour or 2 hours away. And I think that's some of the issues. So that's 2 hours where the agent is now away from the line. That allows the drug smugglers to start bringing their drugs and everything else into the country. Realistically, you're seeing a lot more focus in Texas because the governor in Texas has done a fantastic job of allowing the media and allowing having other law enforcement in those areas that are able to talk about it and see what the problem is. Out here in Arizona, it's been a little bit harder for individuals to see what is happening, and I can tell you specifically, I think it's approximately right over 60 linear miles with Mexico. And it's very limited access to media or anyone else to go out there. As an example, when you are seeing, the mass groups that were coming in Texas or in areas of Lukeville, at the same time, that area, particularly an area called the San Miguel Gate, was experiencing over 1,000 individuals that were entering every single morning, and all they had in that area was 2 agents to watch over 1,000 people.
Thank you. Mayor, I was shocked in your testimony. You're the mayor. You grew up here, and you've actually advised your family to stay off the main thoroughfares. We're almost out of time, but I can only imagine what it's like if you used to recreate on the federal lands here, how much of a discouragement it would be to use the public lands. And to our ranchers and farmers, thank you for what you do. Much of what our committee works on deals with rural America. I'll leave you with a quote by a famous writer named Aldo Leopold. He said, "There are 2 great spiritual dangers of not living on a farm. The first is when you think food comes from the grocery, and the second is when you think heat comes from the furnace." I know it's hard to get young people to go into farming today, into ranching, and it makes it exponentially more difficult when you're in an area dealing with the things you're dealing with the border crisis. So thank you, and I yield back.